My name is Madison Carter, and I was 27 when my stepmother tried to turn my sister's wedding into my public humiliation. The plan was simple: a microphone, a room full of witnesses, and a story about me that she'd been writing since I was 9. What she didn't account for was that I'd spent 3 years learning how to read patterns the way other people read faces. I work in compliance for a hospital network in Chicago. My job is to find what doesn't match: dates that don't line up, approvals that appear out of nowhere, policies that are followed in public and ignored in private. I've learned to treat confusion like a clue. I've learned that the truth usually shows up as a discrepancy, not a confession. And I'd learned, too late, but not too late, that my family ran on discrepancies. On the Saturday of my sister's wedding, the air in Charleston felt like warm velvet. The whole city looked dressed up: wrought iron balconies, pastel houses, magnolia trees throwing shade over cobblestone sidewalks. The venue was an old riverside hotel with big arched windows and a ballroom that smelled like lilies and expensive candles. My half sister, Avery Lane, had always loved things that looked like a movie. She was 24, newly minted attorney, glossy hair, glossy life, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately be treated like the main character. I didn't blame her for that. I blamed the person who had trained everyone else to act like I was the extra. My stepmother, Kendra Lane, floated through the ballroom like the director of the entire production. Kendra wasn't loud; she didn't need to be. She had the kind of smile that could mean anything depending on who was watching, and she used it like a tool. She married my dad when I was 9, 2 years after my mom died. People like to say passed away, but I was 9 and it felt like being dropped into an ocean with no life jacket. My mom, Diane Carter, was the kind of woman who made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs and left little notes in lunchboxes. One day, she was here. A month later, she wasn't. I don't remember the funeral clearly. I remember my dad's face like someone had erased the light behind his eyes. I remember Kendra's hand on his arm at the reception, a hand that looked comforting and strategic at the same time. Kendra had a daughter from a previous relationship, Avery. When my dad married Kendra, I got a new last name in my life, a new set of rules, and a new role. Avery became the symbol of our fresh start. I became the reminder that there had been a life before Kendra. I was the girl with the dead mother, the girl who cried at weird times, the girl who kept forgetting that the new family had its own rhythm. Kendra didn't need to call me difficult out loud. She just had to tilt the room slightly every time I walked in. A comment about my hair being unkempt. A little laugh when I took seconds. A careful story told at dinner parties about how some kids struggle with gratitude. I spent years trying to behave my way out of being disliked. That's a losing game when the other person isn't responding to your behavior. They're responding to what you represent. By the time I moved to Chicago after college, I'd learned how to keep my voice steady no matter what someone else implied. I'd learned how to be useful without being seen. I'd learned to show up early, clean up, and leave before the picture. My dad would call me, alone in his office at night, and talk about sports or the weather like those were the only safe topics. He loved me. I never doubted that. But his love lived inside a house where Kendra controlled the thermostat. In that house, love had rules. Don't confront. Don't embarrass. Don't make things harder. The easiest person to ask to be smaller was always me. When Avery got engaged to Ethan Cole, the family group chat turned into a wedding channel overnight. Ethan was nice in the way polite men are nice around families: firm handshake, steady eye contact, always offering to carry something. He seemed to genuinely adore Avery. I wanted that for her. I wanted the story to be simple, but simple stories don't have Kendra Lane in them. 2 months before the wedding, I got a text from Kendra at 6:12 a.m., which was exactly the kind of time she liked to send messages that sounded helpful, but landed like orders. The message included a list: arrive Friday by noon, help set up welcome bags, attend rehearsal dinner, smile for photos, wear something flattering but not attention-grabbing. That last line made my stomach flip. because it was the same sentence she'd used on my high school graduation day, the same sentence she'd used before my cousin's wedding. It wasn't about clothes. It was about my assigned altitude. I almost didn't go. I had a good excuse: quarterly compliance reporting, an internal audit, long hours. My boyfriend Jonah asked why I kept volunteering for a role that always ended with me feeling bruised. Jonah isn't dramatic, just direct. He grew up in a small family that argued loudly and then made up quickly. My family didn't argue, it performed. Kendra's favorite performance was "We're fine." My favorite performance was "I can handle it." But I went, partly because I wanted to be there for Avery even if she'd never really been there for me, and partly because my dad's voice sounded tired on the phone. He mentioned how much this day would mean to him, how proud he was, how he wished my mom could have seen me thriving in Chicago. He didn't ask me to come outright. He never did. He just left a space in the conversation that I filled, like always. So I flew to Charleston on Friday, took a rideshare to the hotel, and walked into the ballroom while staff were still laying out tables. Kendra was already there, clipboard in hand, hair perfect, wearing a linen dress that looked effortless in a way that takes effort. She spotted me and crossed the room fast, the smile locked on. Her hug was a tap. Her perfume was expensive and sharp. Her first words weren't hello. They were a question about my hair, a question about whether I had managed to get enough sleep, a question about whether my dress for tomorrow was tasteful. 3 questions in a row, all designed to remind me that she was evaluating me the way a manager evaluates an employee. I went to work: welcome bags, name cards, folding programs, fixing crooked ribbons. The wedding party drifted in and out like they were visiting a set, not building it. Avery's bridesmaids were friendly in that glossy way, too. One of them, Lena, was the type who could make anyone feel included with one warm sentence. Another, Paige, looked at me like she'd been preloaded with a story about who I was. I didn't know why. Not yet. I just filed it away. Discrepancy. The rehearsal dinner that night took place on a terrace overlooking the water. String lights, shrimp and grits, a jazz trio. Kendra sat at the center of the long table like the sun, pulling attention in. She toasted Avery and Ethan, told a story about Avery being destined for greatness, and everyone laughed at the parts where they were supposed to laugh. Then she made a little remark about how motherhood teaches you patience, especially when you have more than one kind of child. Her eyes flicked to me for half a second. It was subtle enough that half the table didn't notice. It was obvious enough that my throat tightened. My dad sat at the far end of the table, close enough to hear but far enough to avoid being involved. He watched his plate. I watched his hands. The tips of his fingers were pale where he gripped his napkin. He noticed me looking and gave me a small smile, a private apology with no words. It hurt more than it helped, because it reminded me that he knew and still wouldn't step in. After dinner, I took the elevator up to my room and stood under the shower until the water started to cool. Myself, I was being too sensitive. Myself, I could get through 24 hours. Myself, to focus on the good. Seeing my dad, the ocean, the fact that I had built a life that existed beyond this family's opinion of me. I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender name was Stone and Bloom Weddings. Subject: final run of show, updated. I wasn't on the email list for the wedding planner. I shouldn't have received anything. Discrepancy. I opened it. The email was addressed to Kendra, Avery, and Ethan. It included a PDF attachment. I should have closed it. I knew that. But I also knew the way my stepmother used logistics as power. If I was receiving documents meant for her, it meant something was leaking. And leaks matter. The PDF was the wedding day schedule. There were the normal things: ceremony start time, cocktail hour, dinner service. Then there was a section labeled Toasts and Special Moments. Under Kendra's toast, a note in parentheses: Cue slideshow family tribute. Immediately after line, "Some kids teach you gratitude." Ensure Madison is on camera reaction shot. Photographer stationed aisle left. DJ fade up mic for Kendra, then fade in audio clip. I read it twice. My lungs felt like they forgot what to do. Madison, on camera, Reaction shot, audio clip. This wasn't a toast, it was choreography. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the screen until the words turned into shapes. My brain tried to offer explanations. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was for something else. But the note used my name. Not Madison, not Maddie, not the sister, but my full first name, the way vendors used it. The audio clip line turned my stomach. My stepmother had planned a segment where an audio recording would play while everyone watched my face. Whatever that recording was, it wasn't meant to make me look loved. I didn't sleep. I paced. I replayed every family gathering like security footage. I remembered my stepmother's stories that always had me as the punchline. I remembered how she would joke about my sensitivity and then act shocked when I looked hurt. I remembered the way Avery's friends looked at me earlier, like they'd been pre-informed. And I realized something clean and cold. Kendra wasn't improvising. She never had. She was running a long campaign, and the wedding was the biggest stage yet. At 3:08 a.m., I opened a folder on my laptop called Archive. Inside it was another folder called Timeline. 3 years ago, I didn't have those folders. 3 years ago, I thought I was imagining the pattern. Then I got my first anonymous complaint at work. It happened 6 months into my first job in hospital administration, before I moved into compliance. HR called me in and slid a printed email across the table. The email claimed I had been emotionally unstable, hostile, and a potential risk. It referenced my history of outbursts. None of it was true. I didn't even raise my voice at work. HR investigated and cleared me. They couldn't trace the sender. The email came from a disposable address. Everyone moved on. I tried to, but something about the language felt familiar. Outbursts, unstable, risk. Those were Kendra's favorite words for me, dressed up in different outfits. I started keeping records. Every weird message. Every time Kendra contacted someone in my world, just to check in. Every time for my supervisor's name or my address or the name of a friend. I'd always assumed it was nosiness. Then I compared timestamps. Patterns appeared. Emails to my dad's phone minutes after I updated my social media. A sudden wave of relatives asking if I was okay after I posted a photo from a concert. A cousin's wedding invitation that never arrived, followed by Kendra casually mentioning it like I'd declined. I started treating my life like a case file. It wasn't paranoia if the pattern kept paying rent. In the timeline folder were screenshots and PDFs and logs. I never planned to use them in public. I just needed to know I wasn't crazy. Now, staring at the wedding schedule, I realized I might need more than validation. I might need protection. I didn't confront Kendra. I didn't call Avery. Not yet. I needed to know what the audio clip was. I needed to know if the slideshow existed. I needed to know whether Kendra's plan involved my job, my reputation, my relationship. Anything that could follow me home after the wedding lights went off. At 7:15 a.m., I texted Jonah. Short message. Something is off. I'll explain later. He responded instantly, even though it was early in Chicago. You safe? I'm safe. But I think she's planning something. Then the question he always asked when my family showed up. What do you need? The simplest question. The one my family never asked. I replied, I need to keep my head clear. I went downstairs for coffee and found the wedding planner's assistant in the lobby, balancing a stack of binders. Her badge read Nina. Nina looked exhausted, eyes slightly red like she'd been up late too. I offered to help carry one binder, and she accepted with a grateful smile. We made small talk. I kept it casual. About the schedule update. Nina mentioned how many edits had happened, how Kendra had been very specific about the toast segment. Very specific was Nina's diplomatic phrase for stressful. If the slideshow file had been delivered. Nina confirmed it had, along with an audio clip, uploaded late the night before. The file name, Family Tribute, Final 2. Nina laughed the way people laugh when something isn't funny. I smiled like it was normal, and my insides turned to ice. I didn't ask Nina for the file. I wasn't going to drag a vendor into family warfare. but I didn't need the file to know what it meant. Kendra had created a tribute that included an audio clip timed to a line in her toast. The line involved gratitude. The schedule note mentioned my reaction shot. The plan was to make me look guilty, ashamed, exposed. And because it was a wedding, anyone who objected would look like the villain ruining the happy day. Kendra loved traps that punished you for stepping out. I spent the morning in quiet preparation. I pulled up my timeline folder. I organized it by date. I created a new folder named Charleston. I added the run of show PDF. I took screenshots of the toast notes. I saved the email header showing it came from the wedding planner. Documentation matters. Intent matters. I also wrote a short email to myself, summarizing what I'd found and when. If something happened later and I needed to recall details, I wanted the timestamp. Then I called the one person in my family who never treated truth like a threat. My grandmother, Ruth Carter. Ruth was my dad's mother, 81, sharp enough to slice through nonsense with a single glance. Ruth lived in a small house outside Savannah, close enough to Charleston that she was attending the wedding. She was also the only person who ever used the word unfair out loud when Kendra treated me like a problem. Ruth answered on the second ring. I kept my voice steady. Her about the schedule note. Her there was a planned slideshow and an audio clip designed to humiliate me. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then one question. Do you want me to stop it? The simplicity made my eyes sting. Her I didn't want the wedding to implode. I didn't want Avery to suffer because Kendra couldn't resist control. Ruth made a small sound, the kind that meant she was deciding something. Then me to do one thing. Keep my posture. That was Ruth's version of hold your ground. I hung up and stared at the wall. This was the part where old Madison would have tried to appease, to smooth, to disappear. New Madison had spent 3 years learning that appeasement doesn't end a pattern. It feeds it. The only way to end a pattern is to interrupt it with something the pattern can't absorb. Evidence, witnesses, boundaries, consequences. At noon, hair and makeup started in Avery's suite. I was technically family, but not bridal party. I hovered at the edges, bringing extra bobby pins, helping someone find their earrings, doing the small tasks I'd trained myself to do. Kendra walked in, surveyed the room, and smiled like everything was under control. Her eyes landed on me, held for a half beat too long. The smile tightened, almost imperceptible. She knew I'd seen something. She just didn't know what I'd do about it. The ceremony that afternoon was beautiful. Avery in a lace dress, Ethan's hands shaking slightly as he waited. Vows that sounded real. The kind of sincerity that makes you believe in people again, even if you don't believe in the system they're standing inside. When Avery looked at Ethan, her face softened in a way I'd never seen around our mother. It made my throat ache. I wanted her to have a clean beginning. I just didn't know if Kendra would allow anyone else to have a moment that wasn't hers. Cocktail hour flowed into dinner. The ballroom lights dimmed into warm gold. Everyone found their seats. I was placed at a table near the dance floor, close enough to be visible, far enough from my dad that I couldn't easily talk to him. Discrepancy. The seating chart had been arranged like a map of influence. Kendra didn't leave logistics to chance. Dinner plates clinked, laughter rose and fell. Then the DJ announced the toasts. I felt my spine stiffen. I watched Kendra stand and smooth her dress, the same motion she used before every performance. She walked to the microphone with practiced ease, holding a champagne flute like a prop. The room quieted. Cameras lifted. My pulse felt loud in my ears. Kendra began with warmth. She spoke about love, about family, about how proud she was. She praised Avery with shining words and praised Ethan for joining our family. People smiled, people nodded. I knew this part. This was the honey. Then her tone shifted slightly, just enough to change the temperature in the room. She spoke about motherhood and sacrifice and how raising children can be different journeys. She used Avery as the example of reward. Then she pivoted toward the other journey, toward me. The sentence arrived like a rehearsed blade. Some kids teach you gratitude the hard way. A ripple of laughter moved through the room, the kind that happens when people sense they are expected to laugh, even if they don't understand why. Kendra's eyes found me. The pause stretched. The DJ's laptop waited. The cue in the schedule clicked into place. The slideshow began on the big screen behind Kendra. A title card, family tribute, photos of Avery as a baby, Avery in braces, Avery at prom. Then photos shifted to include me, not flattering ones. A picture of me at 13, mid-cry, face red. A picture of me at 16 with mascara streaks after my mom's death anniversary when I couldn't stop crying in the school bathroom. A screenshot of an old social media post where I wrote about grief and feeling alone. A small gasp moved through the room. Kendra's voice stayed smooth. She framed the images as proof of how difficult it had been to raise someone so sensitive, someone who always saw herself as the victim. Then the audio clip played. Not music, a recording. My voice, younger, raw. A voicemail from years ago, left on my dad's phone when I was 19 and struggling in college. The clip included a line about wanting to disappear from the family because I felt unwanted. Kendra had pulled my private breakdown out of a past I'd fought to survive and placed it on a wedding screen like a comedy reel. The room froze in discomfort. Some people looked down, some people looked at me. Cameras angled toward my face. Exactly as planned. The old version of me would have evaporated. My throat would have closed. My hands would have trembled. I would have apologized for ruining the mood by existing. Instead, I sat still and let the clip finish. I let the silence settle. I let Kendra enjoy the edge of her power for one more second, because power is most fragile right before it breaks. Kendra leaned into the microphone again, smiling as if she delivered something heartfelt. She began to talk about how families stick together, how we forgive, how we support. She implied that I had caused pain and put stress on everyone. She implied that my drama had stolen joy from Avery's milestones. She didn't name me directly at first. She never had to. The room already knew who the other journey was. I stood up. The motion was small, but it cut through the room like a bell. Chairs creaked, people's heads turned. Kendra's smile flickered. She hadn't planned for me to stand. She'd planned for me to disappear. The microphone was still live. The room's attention shifted, and for the first time all weekend, the spotlight moved without her permission. I didn't walk to the mic. I didn't snatch it. I didn't raise my voice. I simply spoke at a volume meant for presentations. I thanked everyone for coming. I congratulated Avery and Ethan. I acknowledged the beauty of the day. Then I did the thing Kendra could never do. I stayed factual. I mentioned that the tribute playing behind her had been planned, edited, and cued in the official schedule. I mentioned that the schedule included a note instructing photographers to capture my reaction. I mentioned that the audio clip was a private voicemail pulled from my dad's phone without my consent. The room shifted again, this time toward clarity. The difference between a joke and a plan is intent. Kendra stepped back from the mic, laughing lightly as if it was all harmless. The laugh didn't land. People could feel the wrongness now that it had a name. I didn't accuse her of being evil. I didn't need to. One question, calm enough to be devastating. Who asks a wedding planner to cue a private breakdown at a wedding? The room held its breath. Kendra's smile stayed on, but the muscles around it tightened. This was where she normally pivoted into tears and victimhood. I didn't give her the space. I opened my phone and projected the run-of-show PDF on the screen, using the venue's Wi-Fi casting option that I'd tested earlier in the afternoon. Discrepancy again. The venue had a backup HDMI input. Nina, the assistant, had told me. I'd prepared. The big screen behind Kendra flickered from her slideshow to my PDF screenshot. Black text on white. Cue slideshow. Ensure Madison on camera reaction shot. DJ fade in audio clip. My name, typed in a professional document, surrounded by instructions. The room collectively understood the difference between an emotional moment and a staged ambush. Kendra turned to the screen, then back to the room. The smile slipped. Not completely, but enough. I didn't stop there. I didn't unload my entire file cabinet. I only shared what fit the moment. Proof that this wasn't spontaneous. Proof that it had been built. Then I turned the story back to Avery and Ethan. Avery, she deserved a day centered on love, not control. Ethan, he deserved to marry into a family that didn't weaponize pain. The room that if anyone wanted to keep celebrating, they could. But they would celebrate without turning someone else into entertainment. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The DJ hovered, hands off controls, waiting for direction. Kendra's eyes scanned the room, looking for allies. She found fewer than she expected. Paige, the bridesmaid, looked like someone had dropped her script. Lena looked furious in a quiet way. My dad stood up so fast his chair scraped. He walked toward the front, not to stop me, but to stand beside me. That was the first time in years he physically placed himself between me and Kendra. Kendra tried to pivot into tears. The voice softened, the shoulders curved, the familiar performance of heartbreak. The room didn't rush to comfort. Tears don't work when intent is visible. My grandmother Ruth stood up from her table near the back. Ruth moved slowly, using a cane she hated. She stopped in the aisle and looked at Kendra with the kind of stillness that makes people stop talking. Ruth didn't shout. Ruth didn't insult. Ruth simply asked the room to remember that Avery's wedding was not a stage for cruelty. Then Ruth delivered one sentence that changed everything. The only reason Kendra had access to that voicemail was because she'd been using my dad's phone while he slept. The room froze again, this time in anger. Kendra's face tightened. She tried to redirect. She tried to claim she was protecting the family from my instability. Ruth didn't let her. Ruth held up a small manila envelope. Ruth had kept it in her purse all day, waiting. Inside the envelope were printed copies of emails that Kendra had sent to Avery's bridesmaids 2 weeks earlier. The emails instructed them to send any old clips of Madison, any dramatic moments, any evidence of attention-seeking. The emails included lines about making sure Madison doesn't hijack the day. The sender address was Kendra's personal email. The room didn't need a translator. It was a recruitment email for humiliation. Avery stood up. Her face had gone pale. She looked from Kendra to the screen to my dad to Ruth. Her hands were shaking, not in guilt, but in a kind of dawning horror that her wedding had been used as a trap. Avery's voice didn't need to be loud. It only needed to be clear. One question that made the room tilt: how long has this been going on? The question hung there, and the answer sat in every memory Avery suddenly reevaluated. Every time Kendra made a joke about me, every time she framed my grief as drama, every time she helped Avery by positioning herself as the reasonable one compared to my supposed chaos. Avery's eyes filled, not with tears for Kendra, with tears for the years she had let the narrative stand without checking it. Kendra attempted the last weapon in her toolbox, a secret. The tone sharpened. The implication arrived. There were things about me, about my mom, about my past, that Avery didn't know. The suggestion that Kendra had been protecting everyone. The room leaned in. This was Kendra's favorite trick. When caught doing something cruel, claim it was necessary because of a larger truth. I'd heard that trick my whole life. It only works if the secret belongs to the person being threatened. This time, the secret belonged to Kendra. Ruth stepped forward again. Ruth didn't look at me when she spoke. Ruth looked at Kendra. Ruth reminded the room calmly that Diane Carter, my mom, had kept a box of letters and journals. After Diane died, Ruth kept the box because my dad couldn't bear to open it. Kendra had asked for the box a dozen times over the years, claiming it would help everyone heal. Ruth had always refused. Now Ruth placed the box, small cardboard taped at the corners, on the gift table at the front of the room. The sight of it changed my dad's face. He looked like someone had been punched by a memory. Ruth opened the box and pulled out a single envelope marked Madison in my mom's handwriting. The room went silent in a different way, the way a room goes silent for something sacred. Ruth explained that Diane had written the letter for me to open on my wedding day someday. Ruth had kept it safe. Ruth also explained, without dramatizing, that Kendra had tried to destroy that letter twice. The first time by claiming the box was lost during a move. The second time by attempting to pick the lock on Ruth's study door while Ruth was in the hospital. Ruth's voice didn't shake. Ruth's eyes didn't soften. Ruth's words carried the weight of years. Kendra's face drained. This was the moment she hadn't planned for. A secret older than her manipulation. A document older than her performance. Ruth read one line from the top of Diane's letter. Not the whole thing. Just one line about love being steady even after a storm. Then Ruth looked at Kendra and made the worst move. The permanent move. Ruth announced that Kendra was no longer welcome at Carter family events. Not as a mother. Not as a coordinator. Not as an honored guest. Ruth didn't need permission. Ruth was the matriarch on my dad's side. Ruth didn't do bands often. When she did, they held. Security didn't drag Kendra out. That would have made the moment messy and theatrical. Instead, Ruth asked the hotel coordinator to quietly escort Kendra to a private lounge until transportation could be arranged. It was clean. It was dignified. It was devastating. Kendra stood there, surrounded by the consequences she had spent decades avoiding. People didn't move to comfort. People didn't clap. People watched her like a person who had been caught stealing oxygen. The DJ waited for direction. Avery looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back, eyes steady. In that glance, I saw something that made my chest ache. Partnership. Ethan nodded slightly, as if giving Avery permission to choose what she wanted next. Avery walked to the microphone. She apologized to the room, not for me exposing anything, but for the fact that her wedding had become a moment of reckoning. Then she did something brave. She refused to let Kendra steal the rest of the night. Avery announced that the celebration would continue, but the family tribute was over. The DJ to play the first dance song. Everyone who wanted to stay enjoy to stay. Anyone who wanted to gossip to leave. Then she turned to me, eyes glossy, and held out her hand. I took it. For the first time since I was 9, my relationship with Avery felt like something that belonged to us, not something filtered through Kendra. We didn't need a long speech. We needed one real gesture. We danced, not a choreographed dance, just a slow sway while the room decided what kind of family it wanted to be. My dad approached after the song ended. He didn't deliver a grand apology. He didn't make a promise he couldn't keep. He simply placed his hand on my shoulder and stayed there, present, visible, not hiding behind a napkin. That quiet choice mattered more than any speech. In our family, presence had always been political. Tonight, my dad chose a side. The rest of the night blurred into small scenes. Relatives hugging me, whispering that they hadn't realized, that they had assumed I was sensitive, that they were sorry. Lena, the bridesmaid, approached with her phone and showed me a group chat where Kendra had been coaching them, suggesting angles for photos, suggesting which stories to tease. Lena looked sick. Lena offered to forward everything to me and to Avery. I thanked her and told her she didn't need to carry the guilt. Kendra had recruited people by framing cruelty as protection. That's how manipulative systems scale, by outsourcing the harm. Around midnight, I stepped onto the terrace outside the ballroom to breathe. The river was black and glossy. A distant boat moved like a silent thought. My hands were steady, but my body felt like it had run a marathon. Ruth came out after me, cane tapping softly on the stone. She didn't ask if I was okay. Ruth asked if I wanted the letter now or later. Her later. I wasn't ready to open my mom's words in a space where Kendra's voice still echoed. Ruth nodded as if she'd expected that. Ruth reminded me that none of this was my fault. Then Ruth said something that landed like a quiet hammer. Kendra's cruelty had never been about me being too much. It had been about Kendra needing someone else to be too much so she could feel like the calm one. The next morning, I met my dad in the hotel cafe. He looked older than he had 2 days earlier. He also looked freer, like someone had finally exhaled after holding breath for years. We talked without performing. He admitted he had seen pieces of Kendra's behavior and tried to keep the peace. He admitted he'd been afraid of losing another family after losing my mom. He admitted he'd let fear become a habit. He didn't use the word sorry as a shortcut. He used it like a commitment. Then what I needed from him now. Him one thing, no more private apologies, no more quiet pity. I needed public boundaries. If Kendra tried to contact me, he would not carry her messages. If she tried to rewrite the story, he would not stay silent. My dad agreed. I watched his face as he made that agreement. He looked like someone stepping into cold water. Uncomfortable, but real. Avery and Ethan left for their honeymoon 2 days later. Before she left, Avery knocked on my hotel door. She didn't bring a speech. She brought coffee and 2 pastries and sat on the bed like we were kids again. Avery admitted she'd known small things were off, but she'd never let herself look directly. It was easier to accept Kendra's version because it made the family feel stable. Avery's voice broke when she admitted that stability had been built on my silence. Avery didn't ask for forgiveness, for a chance to know me without the story attached. I gave her that chance. Not because I owed it, because I wanted it. Back in Chicago, life didn't magically become perfect. Kendra didn't transform into a better person overnight. She attempted contact. She sent an email with the subject line, "We need to talk." I didn't respond. She tried to contact Jonah through social media. Jonah blocked her without asking me, a small act of loyalty that made me laugh softly in relief. Kendra mailed a package to my apartment, a photo album from my childhood, missing certain pages. I didn't open it. I forwarded it to my dad. He returned it to her unopened. That was the new boundary in action. It was quiet. It was firm. It worked. 2 weeks later, Ruth mailed me Diane's letter. It arrived in a thick envelope with Ruth's neat handwriting. I waited until a Sunday afternoon, made tea, sat at my kitchen table, and opened it. My mom's words didn't fix the past. They didn't erase the humiliation. But they did something more important. They reminded me I had been loved before Kendra wrote her narrative. My mom wrote about my stubborn kindness, my sense of justice, my tendency to carry other people's shame as if it were mine. My mom wrote that I would have to learn the difference between compassion and compliance. My mom wrote that sometimes the bravest thing is to let people be angry when you stop being useful to their story. I cried, not because I was broken, but because I could finally grieve the right thing. I wasn't grieving Kendra's approval anymore. I was grieving the years I spent trying to earn it. That grief felt clean, like rain after smoke. A month after the wedding, I received a message from Paige, the bridesmaid who had looked at me like she'd been preloaded with a story. Paige sent a long apology and a screenshot of Kendra's earlier messages. The messages included instructions on how to describe me to others: unstable, jealous, attention-seeking. The messages also included something else, a note about my work, specific enough to confirm my suspicion. Kendra had been the source of that anonymous HR complaint years earlier. Paige hadn't known it at the time. She had thought Kendra was protecting Avery from my drama. Paige's message ended with one line: "I'm sorry I helped without realizing I was helping harm." I didn't respond to Paige with anger. Anger would have been easy. I responded with one sentence: "Do better next time you're asked to turn someone into a warning story." That was enough. The point wasn't revenge. The point was the pattern. My dad filed for separation from Kendra that winter. It wasn't dramatic. It was administrative. My dad moved into a small townhouse near Ruth for a while, close enough to rebuild the parts of himself he'd paused for years. Avery supported him. Ethan supported him. Watching them support him made something inside me loosen. Family could be chosen and rebuilt. It didn't have to be a cage. On the first anniversary of Avery's wedding, Avery invited me to a small dinner in Chicago. No big party, no performative speeches, Just Avery, Ethan, Jonah, my dad, and me at a little restaurant with mismatched chairs and great pasta. Avery gave a toast. It was short. It wasn't about gratitude as a weapon. It was about accountability as love. She thanked me for refusing to disappear. She thanked my dad for showing up. She thanked Ruth for protecting the truth. Then she laughed and admitted that the only thing she regretted was letting Kendra waste the venue's expensive projector on cruelty when it could have shown better photos. We laughed, real laughter, not the nervous kind, the kind you can only have after a storm has moved on. I looked around the table and realized something simple. Kendra had tried to define me in front of a room full of people. Instead, I'd finally defined myself in front of the only people who mattered, myself included. If there's a moral to this, it isn't. Always expose your family. Exposure isn't the goal. Freedom is. The moral is that humiliation only works when you accept the role it assigns you. The moral is that patterns survive on silence and collapse under documentation. The moral is that you don't have to be loud to be unmovable. You just have to be clear. Kendra tried to ambush me with a microphone. I answered with evidence, posture, and a boundary that didn't ask for permission. And the part that still surprises me, even now, is this. The day my stepmother tried to make me the villain, I didn't become the villain. I became the witness. And once you become the witness, their story stops being the only one in the room.